Hey everyone, Jody Avergan here. On Sundays over the course of the summer, July and August, we're going to be bringing you some of our favorite episodes from the archives. You're still going to get brand new episodes on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but we're giving ourselves a little bit of a break on Sundays, running a previous episode. It's still from around the same date, so it will still hook in that way. But look, we've done about 450 of these. There's a good chance you haven't heard this one or haven't heard it in a while and might want to re-listen. So, here we go with a Sunday favorite from the archives. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avergan. This day, August 22nd, 1831, in Southampton County, Virginia, a two-day rebellion is taking place led by Nathaniel Nat Turner. Turner's rebellion is one of the most notable and consequential slave revolts in this era. This is actually our first time talking about Nat Turner on the show, so we will talk a little bit about Nat Turner, but we also think that there are parts of this story that are less covered or less remembered. So here to discuss the Nat Turner rebellion, the wrinkles that add some complexity to the story are, as always, Nicole Hemmer of Columbia and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
And also joining us, our special guest for this episode is Vanessa Holden of the University of Kentucky. She is the author of, among other things, the book Surviving Southampton, African American Women and Resistance in Nat Turner's Community. It is nice when the title of the book lays out all the elements that we want to discuss, so we will try and touch on women, resistance, Nat Turner, and community as part of this story. Vanessa, welcome to the show. Thanks for doing this.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Okay, so can I just open up this conversation by saying I'm so excited to be in conversation with you, Vanessa, because I put your book on my syllabus and I cannot wait to have my students discuss it, because I think most people are familiar with Nat Turner, or they heard about the rebellion. They know that it's the most, violent or deadly rebellion, but that's about it. It sort of stops right there. So can you, for our listeners, really lay out sort of the scene of what happens, and then tell us what your book lays out as well?
Sure. So the Southampton Rebellion, it wasn't the first slave rebellion in what becomes the United States. It wasn't the longest rebellion. It wasn't even the largest rebellion, but it remains the most famous. Most people had an image of Nat Turner in a textbook at some point. It probably actually came from Harriet Beecher Stowe's novel, Dread of the Great Dismal Swamp, so not actually of Nat Turner. And there's a sense, because 1831 is right at the heart of the Jacksonian era, that it's a pivotal event. It shocks the entire nation, and it becomes really important for abolitionists to say, see what happens when you don't do something about this huge, horrible national sin. The rebellion itself lasted for about 2 days. So it began late in the evening of August 21st with a barbecue, which we can talk about a little bit more. And in the wee hours of the 22nd, began at the Travis farm. A group of 5 enslaved men, a few of whom were actually enslaved on the Travis place, murdered their enslavers, including children and 1 infant who lived on the property. And from there, the plan was to really go from farm to farm in the neighborhood, and with the explicit goal of murdering every white man, woman, and child, a pretty distinctive feature of the revolt. Previous revolt plots in other places had spared certain groups of white people, like Quakers, or were only targeting men, but they went for everyone. And it wasn't until a chance encounter with militia in the afternoon of the 22nd, just as they were about to cross the Nottoway River that bisects the county and make their way to Jerusalem, now Cortland, Virginia, to hopefully seize a militia arsenal there, that they happened to meet militia coming the other direction across the bridge. And the sort of ensuing chaos after that meeting really saw the kind of degeneration of the rebellion into the 23rd. At its peak, it's estimated that about 50 enslaved insurgents traveled from farm to farm. But one of the things my book argues is that those 50 insurgents, maybe they were the more sort of visible piece of the revolt. But enslaved women, free women of color, were really the supply line, the supply corps and the intelligence network. And you can't have a successful military operation without those two things. If you don't have good eyes and ears on the ground, if you don't have a good system of resupply, you can't hope for a very successful revolt. The way that I entered the project as an undergraduate student, reading the Confessions of Nat Turner, the famous primary source related to the revolt, I remember thinking as I was reading Nat Turner's words sort of mediated through a local lawyer that he remained at large really in the county, very close to the places where he was enslaved for 2 months or so. Mm-hmm. After the revolt was put down, he hid in a woodpile for a while, and then he hid in a dugout cave very close to where he was enslaved on the Travis place, very close to where the initial barbecue happened. And my first question was, who in the world was feeding Nat Turner? And I realized, in that very early moment, someone did. Someone kept him alive. Mm-hmm. And at first I thought of community. And then I started looking for women.
Focusing on community is interesting, especially in this case, because Nat Turner as a personality and as an individual looms so large in the way that we talk about this story. And one of the things that's really notable about him, and something that was struck me as you mentioned that they were headed to Jerusalem, is that he is known as this very religious figure, almost like a somebody who's steeped in religion and almost a mysticism around religion. Was that spirituality and religion something that was common in the community, or was that something that was unique to Turner?
It's important to note that the 1830s are also a time of much broader evangelical religious movements in the country. But Turner speaks about spirituality in his confessions from a very young age, handed to him by his parents, and particularly his grandmother. And really that spirituality gave him a sense of value, what Dinah Remy Berry might call soul value, from a very young age. He really notes that it is about evangelical Christianity, in the sort of mid-antebellum mode, but it's also about the community reinforcement of a value that comes from outside of present circumstances.
In your book, you sort of talk about the silences and how the silences actually are loud. Like, they tell us a lot about this moment, because I think so much is, either lost to history or, we don't know. But you make use of that space. Can you talk about how you navigate the silences within the rebellion and people's unwillingness to snitch, really? Because almost in every rebellion, it's like, there's always a snitch. There's always a snitch, but not so much here.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually one of the most important characterizations, that nobody gave away the plot before it happened. That is actually a much more common story, at least when it comes to American slave revolt and rebellion, that there are these elaborate plots with deeply, political motivations and whole political philosophies behind them. And somebody gives it up before it actually happens, right? And the miracle that did not happen in this case is the reason it was successful. I mean, that they had this element of surprise. In fact, whites in the county were so gobsmacked that it could possibly be enslaved people rising up to murder them, that some actually were crying that the British were coming. They had these sort of callbacks to the War of 1812 or the Revolution, that it must be the British. That must be what it is.
That's amazing.
Yeah, but to get to your question about silence, so I did a lot of work in the kinds of documents that people had always looked at for this rebellion. There's been a published collection of trial transcripts for suspected slave rebels for a very long time. And throughout them, Black women, free and enslaved, appear to give depositions, both in coerced situations and voluntarily. And what helped me think through these documents, where many historians had been stumped before, had come away with the impression that women just were not involved in this at all, or somehow had no idea it was happening before it actually happened and showed up on their doorstep, was that the women who appear in court answer the questions that they're asked. And that's about it.
Right.
And nothing else.
And nothing else.
It's like the women can hide in plain sight, though.
Because
of their gender, and because it's like, well, you couldn't have been involved, so tell us what you know, kind of thing.
And, women make really complicated choices. There are people who, in the moment, make choices to hide white children or to allow a very pregnant, white enslaver to escape, right? And so, if anything, the ways that historians have dealt with those stories in the past is to really believe white narrators from the period, that like women were overwhelmingly loyal, that they weren't really in favor of this rebellion, that they were trying to thwart it at every turn, when I just see human beings who maybe have particular lines that are different. And so what I really want to do in the book was say, no, there's this really important human dimension here. And these are the people who, overwhelmingly, it's women who are going to survive this and have to figure out how to carve out life in the wake of this revolt.
You're used to hearing my voice on the world, bringing you interviews from around the globe.
And you hear me reporting environment and climate news. I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. We're now with you hosting The World Together. More global journalism with a fresh new sound.
Listen to The World on your local public radio station and wherever you find your podcasts.
As we start to wrap up, can we return to this question of community? I mean, I'm curious what you learned about the actual community in Southampton and what made it special or unique or able to sort of band together in the way that you've been describing, and how was that different from maybe other communities, even the communities that had uprisings and revolts?
I think one of the reasons that the rebellion sends such shockwaves throughout the nation is that Southampton County actually looks like a lot of places all over the South. There are a few really wealthy people who own a lot of land and enslave a lot of people, but the vast majority of people are sort of middling. They practice mixed agriculture. They have a handful of enslaved people. Sometimes almost half of those enslaved people are children, so people under the age where they would be taxed as a full hand. And so I think, there are ways that Southampton is sort of everywhere, southern USA, that the way Southampton County looks is way more common across the American South in the period. And to that end, because white enslavers are holding people in smaller numbers, they are much more adept and nimble at the ways they're treating enslaved people, like for financial products. That the ways families are separating Black families and moving them around from place to place. A brother, sister, and another brother are moving people and children around to kind of fortify family fortunes and viability. And so there's a way in which, another historian calls this a really intimate rebellion. All of these people know each other. And many of the enslaved people who are murdering white enslavers grew up with the white enslavers they're murdering. And one of the reasons that I think that they, also went for children is that they understood in really important ways that not only was slavery a hereditary status, but the status of an enslaver was also hereditary. And they didn't want anybody to grow up to be able to sell them away. In fact, Nat Turner was actually enslaved by a child. He was actually someone's inheritance. And when that child came of age, he was going to become his enslaver. So when I look at this Black community, they are people who are incredibly aware of the geography of the county, both the physical geography and the human geography of the county. And they're aware of the threat of the Cotton South. They have watched these enslavers sell people away to bolster their fortunes. They are very aware that at any moment they could be traded somewhere else in the county to help out somebody's brother or cousin or something. And they also live among free African Americans who are actually often embedded in enslavers' households, hired in as sort of supplemental labor. And so they also know that free Black status does not equate with a huge change in material conditions and living conditions. So the ways that the community is devising to support itself, that barbecue I talked about, at the top, hogs were allowed to roam free and they went missing. And so did the apple brandy that was actually pretty famous in the county at the time. And so starting at that barbecue is actually starting with the way that enslaved people in the county had resisted enslavement for a really long time. And knowing how to get away, right, with those sort of brief moments of respite really build into moments where women are testifying, well, I was making dinner, and then this guy came by and told me, look, this is falling apart. You don't know me anymore. And then he just stepped over my white enslaver's body and what you're like, whoa, rewind. Like you were making dinner and there's dead enslavers all over the place.
Pause. We need to pause right
now. What? Right. That this sense of, okay, slavery is both this system that Black people had to be able to adapt to in the moment and know their enslavers incredibly well to survive, and be able to sort of project into the future, right? What could happen. And so really what I talk about by the end of the book is the ways that even as executions are mounting, trials are continuing, it is clear who is back in charge. Black people, even through their testimonies, even through the ways they're floating in and out of downtown Jerusalem, are building new community structures for resistance. Silence is a piece of it, but also free people of color are in the same, at the same court dates, insisting that their free papers get reread into the court record. They're indenturing their children to make sure they stay in the county with their family. I mean, really working an incredibly exploitative system to keep their family together. So, when we think about community, that's always fraught. Everybody doesn't get along. It's not, a monolithic community, but folks are adapting ways to, in the moment, make split-second decisions for survival and for the preservation of the people who remain.
All right. Well, we will have to leave it there, but this is really fascinating and adds so much complexity to a story that I think some people know but don't really know. And I will just also shout out just that, so much deep historical work starts from what you articulated as such simple and straightforward questions like who fed Nat Turner, or what were the women up to, or why did no one stitch, or what were they talking about at that barbecue? But that's just such a nice reminder that sometimes just ask those very simple questions and they can unlock a whole hidden history. So we really appreciate you coming on. And again, the book is Surviving Southampton, African American Women and Resistance in Nat Turner's Community. Vanessa Holden, University of Kentucky, thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
And Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you as always.
Thanks, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
This Day in Esoteric Political History is a proud member of Radiotopia from PRX, a network of independent, listener-supported, artist-owned podcasts. Our researcher and producer is Jacob Feldman. Our producer is Brittany Brown. You can get in touch with us with any questions or comments or ideas for the show. Email us thisdaypod@gmail.com, or you can find a form at thisdaypod.com. My name is Jody Avirgan. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you soon.
Radiotopia.
From PRX.